everybody, what's going on? TJ here from Judy and TJ's Midlife Adventures. I'm out here in the shop. Judy's in the house. She's working from home today. So thought rather than sit there and bug her where she couldn't get anything done, I'd come out here in the shop and try and get some stuff done on a couple of different projects. Starting with this one, our race car. This is our Formula FST project that we've talked a little bit about on the channel, but haven't really gotten too deep into, really because we weren't doing a whole lot at the time. My little shop here doesn't have any heating or air conditioning, and the heating factor, hey, it's been cold here in central Indiana up until here very recently. But we have made some progress. We are a lot further along than it looks, and I've got a good feeling we're going to be able to get this car on the track probably much sooner rather than later. But I want to kind of show you around here a little bit, show you what we've done, show you what we still have to do. So just to give you a real quick thumbnail sketch of what you're looking at here, this is the chassis of an SCCA Formula FST or Formula First car, not to be confused with Formula One. That is a completely different beast. This is a hobby level sports car racing setup that we have here. The body is out of the trailer, and I'm going to go show you that. It was just recently painted by my grandson as part of his high school vocational project, and I set it out in the trailer so it didn't get damaged or anything until we have a chance to put it back on the race car. But we had a lot of things we needed to do to this car to get the body off of it to do it, including cleaning it up and a few other things. So that's why it's in the condition it is. You can see the brake rotors have a little rust on them. Don't worry about that. That gets cleaned off very quickly and looks good. But just to give you a little bit of an update or just to kind of give you a little bit of an education on the cars we're looking at here. These cars are built very similar to the style that race cars were built in the 60s. That is basically a tube frame. In this case, there's a little bit of square tubing down the bottom, but basically chromoly tubing frame, which is very strong. As I mentioned, it's open wheel, open cockpit. There's no roof on this car whatsoever. The bodywork fits around it, but the wheels are open. So very much like what you'd see in an Indy car or Formula One car as far as the styling and the way it looks. In fact, these cars look very similar to Indy cars did in the late 60s, early 70s. The power plant, very interesting. There's a good chance many of you, if you are above the age of 45 or so, may have some experience with this engine. This is a Volkswagen engine that came right out of a Volkswagen Beetle or a Karmann Ghia. It's the 1600 cc's or the 1.6 liter, air-cooled, puts out somewhere around 55, 56 horsepower, give or take. We use a stock engine. The rear end is a stock Volkswagen rear end, so the transmission, the axle, everything back there is exactly as it came off of the Volkswagen, as is our front end, our front axle, this whole assembly right here. Now there's been a little bit of modification on this, more or less meaning we've had some things cut off that don't need to be on there. But other than that, we can't change any of that. The only thing we were able to do to this that didn't come on the Volkswagen was we were able to put disc brakes on the front of these cars, which makes them stop substantially better than drum brakes do. But that's what you're looking at there. So some of this looks familiar and you're thinking, man, I've seen that somewhere before. If you're anything of a car enthusiast, you have seen it before because it was on a Volkswagen that you or your family may have owned at one time. All right, we're looking down into the cockpit now, and again, with the body off, it's very easy to see what's going on. We have our steering wheel, which is removable. The reason you want that is because to climb down into this car, you actually step into the cockpit here, slide your feet down, then lower your body into this position, right, or this area of the car right here. Now, right now I have some of the tools and the stuff that we need to continue the rebuild project, so I put them in there so they don't get lost. But once this car is finished, inside of here, we swing around to the back will be the fuel cell. There's a 5-gallon fuel cell. We run aviation gasoline. And then on top of that will be a aluminum box that I'll show you here in just a second. But then we will pour a custom seat. That's going to be a neat project, and I'll show that to you when we do it. But if you look up here on the right, the red knob, that is the gear shift. As we look over here, we also have a couple other things, including right down here, this allows us to adjust the rear shock absorber to help with handling. And if you look over here on this side, there's this little green tab you see there that allows us to adjust the brake bias, meaning we can add or subtract braking power from front to rear as we deem needed on the racetrack. As we look up here to the left, that's a tachometer, gives us the engine RPM. To the right, that is the temperature gauge, gives us the oil temperature. The red lever right there, that is used to set off the fire bottle, which will flood the engine compartment with water in case there's a fire. And we have another switch down there that's ignition. That's the starter button there, the round black switch. And we also have a rain light. These cars do race in the rain, and they are required to have a light on the back. So amongst all the spray that gets kicked up by an open wheel car, the drivers behind you can see what's going on. So there's the inside of the race car. The only thing that's missing on that as well are the seat belts. By rule, those seat belts are only good for a specific amount of time. The seat belts that came in this car when I bought it were no longer, they were out of date, so those are going to be replaced. But let's take a look at these fuel cells. This is the fuel cell and the fuel cell container, easier for me to say, right, that came with the car. To say this car was neglected would be a bit of an understatement. If you look at this, as you can see, this plastic is all cracked. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that this was going to leak fuel. In fact, it did not leak fuel. But if you look right here, this was manufactured in December of 2006, and just over time, this plastic deteriorates. There's actually a very, very strong fabric inside of here that is actually where the fuel sits, and this is really just meant to protect it from puncture or anything of that nature. But clearly, you can't run this. This was not a good situation. Having said that, we're going to replace it with this fuel cell here. Now, if you saw the picture of the car crash on the thumbnail, that car was destroyed. It was owned by a good friend of mine, Logan Miller, who's helped me with this project. This is actually the fuel cell that came out of that car. So we're going to use this in the new race car. We also have this new containment box, which will also act as the back of the seat in the car when we get that poured and get that all ready to go. So that's going to be one of the projects, is to get this installed and fitted and get all the fuel lines and the plumbing hooked up when we go to replumb the engine. All right, it's kind of dark in here, but I think this camera actually is going to light it a little bit for us. This is the bodywork for the race car. Over here we have the nose piece. Fits on the very front of the car, of course. And over here, these two long pieces here, well, those are side pods. Those go on the side of the race car, and they cover up the fire bottle and a lot of the wiring. If we walk up here, this is the cockpit cowling. This fits over the cockpit where I'm going to sit and drive. Steering wheel, of course, will be right underneath that black plastic. That's not really a windshield. It's kind of more just designed to keep stuff, debris and stuff off the racetrack from bouncing down into the race car. And then this is the engine cowling, which goes over the back of the race car. What's interesting, these cars are not super aerodynamic. Frankly, they just don't really go fast enough for any type of ground effects or downforce or anything of that nature. So really, the bodywork on these cars merely covers the car up, keeps stuff from getting, dirt and debris from getting into the car, into the cockpit. And of course, aesthetically, you want them to look nice. But these cars are really neat, and they are fun to drive from what I hear. And I've driven some Formula cars, meaning some open wheel, open cockpit cars, but I've not driven one of these yet, despite having owned one. So I'm looking forward to that. But this is the body. The color that we chose for it is burnt orange. Picked that up at O'Reilly Auto Parts here in Central Indiana, so very easy to find. Can always get some touch up if we need it. But I think once we get this all lettered up and get the rest of the graphics on it, it's going to look pretty cool. As we look down in here, you can see we have our gas pedal on the right, and to the inside of that is the brake. And to the left of that, all the way on the left, just like in a standard car, well, again, if you're over 45, you've seen this setup before, that is the clutch. Now, this has the 4-speed transmission that came from the factory from Volkswagen in it, that's in the rear end of this, and we are not able to change any of those gear ratios. Excuse me. We can't change any of the gear ratios, so we are stuck with what's in there, for better or for worse. Some tracks it works real well, other tracks it could be a little different, but it doesn't really matter because we all have the exact same thing. Not a lot of shifting in this class. Usually you're just shifting from 4th gear down to 3rd gear. After you get started, the green flag drops and you're up to racing speed. And usually the question everybody asks next is, how fast will this car go? Well, it's really going to depend on the racetrack because of the gearing situation. By that I mean we can't adjust the gear ratios to match the racetrack. But if we've got a good racetrack with a nice long straightaway, and by long straightaway I mean something over 3,000 feet, like a mid-Ohio road course, in mid-central Ohio, or maybe Road America at Elkhart Lake, Wisconsin, Pittsburgh International Raceway. They've got a couple of nice long straightaways on that track. This car by itself can run around 120 miles an hour, and if you're in a draft, meaning there's one or two cars lined up nose to tail, punching a big hole in the air, that makes all the cars go faster. We can get up to 130, maybe even 135 miles per hour on the right racetrack. But typically this car is going to run on a say like a mid-Ohio racetrack, which is a little over 2 miles of road course, where you're accelerating, you're slowing down to go through some of the turns. Going to average somewhere between 75 and 80 miles per hour for the lap. So high speed of around 120 or so, and a low speed somewhere around 35 or 40. And again, it just really all kind of depends on the racetrack. So again, just want to kind of give you a little bit of an update on this. It looks like we're probably going to have this car ready to start up by the first part of May, maybe the second weekend of May, somewhere in that time period, depending on when Logan can kind of help me out with this. I could probably figure out how to do the plumbing on this, but if I make a mistake, the consequences can be fairly catastrophic, especially to my wallet of having to rebuild the motor because I put the wrong oil line on the wrong fitting. So I'm going to wait till I've got somebody that knows exactly how to do it, that can teach me so I can do it by myself next time. After that, it's just a matter of figuring out gas prices. That's kind of a killer right now. Dragging this car in that big trailer I've got with a motorhome is very expensive. Entry fees are pretty expensive, so we're kind of watching, just kind of see what the economy does and things like that, but we're hoping to be on the track June or July and get a couple of races in this particular race car. Now, we do have one other racing vehicle that we'll probably get to run a couple of times as well. I'm going to show that to you right now. This is my 125cc shifter cart. This is a high-performance go-kart. In fact, I would call it the pinnacle of kart racing. You have the 125cc shifters, and then you have the 250cc shifters. Those two typically at any given racetrack are going to be the fastest class that show up at any race. The configuration in which I run this for, which we call road racing. Now, just without getting too deep into the weeds, road racing to a lot of people means, well, instead of making all left-hand turns like you do on an oval, like you see with most NASCAR races, you're making left-hand turns and right-hand turns. That is correct. However, in the karting world, when we race on the smaller racetracks, the tracks that are anywhere from a quarter mile to a mile, that's typically what we call sprint racing, meaning the races are typically short in length, 10 to 12 minutes, and you'll run 3 or 4 of them in a day. Well, in road racing, we race on the bigger racetracks. In fact, we run on a lot of the same racetracks we race on with the Formula FST car. But we run fewer races, but the races are longer. We'll run 25-minute races. And the only reason they're only 25 minutes is honestly, that's all the more fuel we can carry on board. You really don't want to be making a pit stop. In these races, there are typically 17 to 20 classes of karts of different shapes and sizes. So 25 minutes seems to be a good spot for it. This kart is powered by a 125cc Honda CR125 engine. This is the same Honda engine that you would find on a motorcycle. In fact, these are built for dirt bikes. This class was huge in the 90s to the point where it inspired some other engine manufacturers to build engines that weren't meant for motorcycles and put on go-karts. They were meant specifically for go-karts. And in fact, you'll see a lot more of those than you will see these. The reason I run the Honda is it is very, very inexpensive to race week in and week out. Replacement parts for it, very inexpensive. They're everywhere. I can go down to the motorcycle shop and get it. If I'm someplace I'm racing and I have an issue and there's not a go-kart shop around, typically you're going to be able to find a motorcycle shop. The kart itself, how fast will it go? That's the next question. Well, let's back up here real quick. The reason it's called a shifter kart is because it has a shiftable transmission on it. It has a 6-speed transmission, the same one that came with a motorcycle. The difference between this and the race car, though, is we can change these gear ratios. If I come back here, by changing the size of the gear that is on the axle, and I can also change the size of the gear or the number of teeth that are on the end of the crankshaft. So I have a tremendous amount of flexibility and can really tune the transmission to the racetrack I've got. As I mentioned earlier on the race car, can't do that. I'm stuck with what's in there. It is what it is. However, with this, I can tune this to be specifically designed for the racetrack I'm racing on. So how fast will it go? The class I race, which is a heavier class, kart racing is done by weight classes in engines. So in the 125cc shifter class, I run Honda Heavy, which means myself and the go-kart at the end of the race when we roll across the scales has to weigh 420 pounds. So the kart weighs right about 220. I weigh about 200, and I put a little bit of weight on it to help out. In that configuration, the highest top speed I've been in this kart was 105 miles an hour. However, because of the transmission, because of the lower center of gravity, this kart is actually faster than the race car is on the stopwatch at the same racetrack. So if I were to be at, let's say, Mid-Ohio, I would probably be, and again, I haven't driven the other kart Mid-Ohio yet, so I'm only going by some lap times from other people that have raced there. The go-kart would be about 5 seconds a lap faster, simply because we can go through the corners quicker and we can accelerate out of those corners quicker because of the transmission and the weight. The weight to horsepower ratio is what really gets interesting, because this kart here will put out 20 some horsepower. So not too far off of what we got over here, but it is substantially lighter, about a quarter of the weight. So tons of fun, love racing these things. I can race it in a street race through the streets of a city when they have those, or I can take it to a big track like Daytona, where they run the 24 Hours of Daytona there at Daytona International Speedway, and I can race this go-kart. So won't be getting rid of that anytime soon, but we're definitely going to try and make plans to have this on the racetrack a couple of times this season. And if I turn around over here, we'll have this bad boy out on the racetrack once we get it put together a couple of times, so 4 or 5 races this year. That is the plan. So that's what we're doing with the race cars, the go-kart, all part of this midlife adventure thing that we're doing this summer. Really appreciate all of you who subscribe to the channel. If you haven't and you'd like to follow up and see what we're doing with all this stuff, as well as the other fun things we're doing, make sure you take just a quick second, hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell. That goes a long way in helping us fund some of this stuff. Of course, it doesn't cost you a dime, but it does help us because YouTube gives us a little bit once we meet some certain criteria, which means we can go out and make some more videos for you. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you soon.